What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show, the cast. My name is Nick Valley.
My name is Jonah Dockenai, and we are.
And this is
Rev Rock Revolution!
And I promise you, this is going to be the most important broadcast of two guys yelling at each other you're going to see this week.
Yes.
Anyways, welcome back to the show. If you watch this show months from now, that's not going to make any sense out of context. But if you're watching it this week, it makes total sense. That's all I'm going to say. Welcome back to the show. As you notice, there's only two of us today. The classic, the OG version of Rev Rock, which is kind of the theme of the show today. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But we thought it would be a good idea. You know, we kind of have a gap with guests right now, and we didn't want to leave everybody hanging. We didn't do an episode last week. But we just love doing this so much. Like, Joan, I don't want to speak for you, but...
Yeah, no, dude, I love this. This is one of my favorite parts of the week. I get to chat with one of my best friends. We get to talk music. And then, we learn a lot of stuff, too. Like, even when it's just the two of us, we end up learning a crap ton of stuff.
This is very true. Jonah learns a lot about Kiss products that he had no idea existed. And, you know, I learn a lot about, you know, tons of stuff that they're doing, like the way that they're touring. And I mean, I think we just learned so much from each other. This show has been such a great experience. And yeah, we just have a whole episode dedicated to how much we love the podcast. That's so meta. That's so meta.
This podcast is called Top 10 Reasons Why We Love Rev Rock Revolution. Number 1, it has it has Nick Valley and a member of Jinx.
Exactly. It's crazy just how much things have changed too since we started the show. And I'm looking forward to we're kind of going to do a, like, Jonah, I don't know the best way to describe this, but a walk down memory lane a little bit today. And kind of bringing that into the modern show going forward. I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit, Jonah. Just, you know, Rev Rock in general. And
when we started this, like, when we started this, we didn't know. So our idea for Rev Rock Revolution is, like, we're gonna talk about the modern rock scene, and then, like, create this huge community of bands, like, along the way, like, musicians and music fans alike. We wanted to build this big community, but we also didn't know how to do a podcast, so we were kind of trying to do that while learning how to do a podcast at the same time. So we didn't really, like, lose sight of our goal, but it we definitely want to focus a lot more on that community part now, because now that we're in season 3, we kind of know what we're doing. It still varies all the time. I don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time, but we're gonna start getting back on that focus of building this community, making rock a better place.
Exactly. No, I couldn't have said it better. And I think we've had so many rants about this over the years. We've had so many conversations about this on the show. And I think it is important now more than ever, because I feel like, I don't want to say it was premature, because we've had this show for a while, and, like, I'm so glad that this thing has been a continuous, regular part of my life and your life and the viewers' life. I'm like, they love the show and getting to know us more. But I think it was a little bit, for lack of a better word, premature, because I feel like, as far as that sense of community and the way rock is evolving, from when we started this show to where it is now, I feel like it's moved forward so much. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I feel like, just in general, like, rock music is every year getting closer and closer to the mainstream, and is pushing. It's becoming more and more relevant.
Agree.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, no, kind of speaking on that, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how we started this show. Yeah, so when we started, before we had the idea for the podcast, we were talking about starting the music scene. And
we were talking about Rev Rock Revolution. We wanted to build that community of artists, because we'd both like just come out of Mastermind for the most part, or like we were like nearing the end of our time in Mastermind, and we loved that community, and we wanted to do a community like that, but like really focused on rock bands, and yeah, and the whole concept was pretty much like we'd help each other, or like we'd introduce people to other bands that we've known, and then they could bring in their friends who are in bands, and then we could like if someone like needed a show in this state or this city, you could do that, and then you'd already have like a lineup, because we'd have like say like 50 bands or so, all in a Discord server or something. Yeah, and then we could help shows, and then get advice on songwriting, and just like people that are doing the same thing as us, and then just helping each other out.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it goes that deep. Like, we didn't really talk, and I'm glad that you're touching on this, because I don't think we ever really even touched on that aspect of it at the time when we started this, because we were kind of trying to find a way to promote that, and that's how the podcast came along. We were like, you know what? Let's start a podcast and let's talk about this concept and what we're doing. And quickly it kind of went off the rails, and we kind of just started talking about whatever.
Yeah, we had no idea how to structure a podcast. Yeah.
And I think we have
chaos.
A bit of a better grasp on how to do this.
Just a little bit.
Kind of, sort of. But that being said, I do think it is important to kind of circle back to this, because like you were saying, I feel like we're at such a different point. I just noticed a shift in rock culture in general as of late. And yeah, I think it's important to kind of talk about it. And we both kind of been out there more and really involved. And I kind of went off more into the pop community, and you've really dove deep into the rock community live scene. And I've gotten deep into the pop rock alternative, like virtual kind of world. And I think it's been great. But that, I just like the vision that we always had, I think, for Rev Rock, I still see happening. And I think now is a relevant time to kind of bring that back in. So that being said,
Agreed.
I want to talk a little bit about where we are in comparison to like where we were then. So when we started the show, we kind of talked about a couple of different bands. One of them was Mammoth, The Warning, Dirty Honey, Aaron Jones. Like, there were different artists and things that were doing fairly well, like I would say, within the rock space. But I think that they've definitely made leaps and bounds since then. Maneskin too. You know, especially. But yeah, like number one, and I'm sure you could touch on this too, but Mammoth, like when we started this show to like where they were to where they are now, like in terms of relevancy, and I feel like it's just shifted. A lot of things have shifted for him. Yeah,
well, Mammoth just like keeps on doing his thing, and he's just growing exponentially. Because he's friends with so many of the rockers, and like he does kick-ass shows. One thing I love is Dave Grohl always says, like, there is nothing that will ever replace just seeing a kick-ass live band and then just being in awe because of how well they do on stage. Like, and I feel like Mammoth is doing that. Is like I feel like every time I look on Instagram, they have a giant tour going on, and
they never stop. They never stop. They went from opening in small venues to headlining in small venues to opening in big venues and headlining decent sized venues, like mid-sized venues, and now they're like opening in like these giant arenas, doing like still doing these they're always on tour. I don't think they've stopped in like 2 years. It's like it's pretty crazy.
Crazy. Like I like that, and the fact that he's able to like have the stamina to do that, because I've been experiencing like the touring stuff, and of course I love it and stuff, but it does get tiring after. It does get tiring, and there did get a period where I was a little burnt out for a couple weeks and needed to reset, but
yeah. For sure. No, it's so true. And I can kind of speak to that with a lot of those kind of bands that we're talking. I think The Warning is a band that kind of right after
The Warning is
they were more.
Or
Yeah,
go ahead. Oh,
no. I'm.
Yeah, The Warning, when we started, I feel like it was like a year after they released their first album, or their first album on a major label. So they were just like kind of just getting the ball rolling, being on a major label. They had good songs. It had pretty good production, and then they were playing so many shows. I think they probably played over 200 shows in the past year. Like their touring schedule has been crazy, and they've been growing so much. They just released their new album today, and
That's right. Well, that's great timing.
Yeah, and they played on Jimmy Kimmel Live last night as well to
they're doing
promote
stuff
it.
like that more often.
Yeah, and they're
now.
getting more rock. Like I'm starting to see more rock bands, like legacy bands and newer bands on the air, especially like Jimmy Kimmel Live, where they have like music. Like I saw like Creed the other day was on like Good Morning America, or I think.
Nope.
Like,
I've watched those clips many times.
Yeah.
But no, dude, you're so right. Like, just their rock's place and real bands and music's place in the industry. I mean, you could talk about there's a plethora of artists like. Plush is another one of those bands that I've just seen out there more and more all the time. But yeah, like you said, The Warning and Mammoth and just pretty much everybody on the frickin' Dirty Honey, like everybody on the Rev Rock playlist that we made. Plug right there. Thank you, Gene Simmons, for the mentoring. But everybody on that playlist has, it's just relevancy in popular culture has been pushed forward so much, and I just see that happening more and more and more, because I think rock is starting to find its place again, like its footing. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like it felt like they were from like 2010 to like, this is going to sound like a very bold thing to say, but I feel like up until COVID, like the Mammoth the first Mammoth record changed the rock industry completely. Like I felt like from like 2010 to like that record coming out, it was very directionless, just rock in general. Not a lot of stuff was coming out except legacy acts were putting out like albums that weren't
legacy acts were the only ones anything. Like keeping
and no one was even talking about that stuff. Like it was just like diehard fans were listening to this music. All of a sudden, all these bands after COVID came out of nowhere. Like, I feel like Mammoth really ignited a movement of, like, people heard that album and were like, I haven't heard a great, original, fresh, like, innovative-sounding rock record like this in, like, 30 years. Like, when that album came out. That was everybody's, like, reaction. Like, this is the most innovative thing to happen to rock music, like, in a really long time. Because up until that point, it felt just very stock and programmed, and know what I'm talking about, like that era in the 2010s.
I feel like that era. I feel like the reason for that was because that was when like YouTube was really popping off, so everyone was doing like, instead of like doing like band stuff, a lot of people were like a ton of like bedroom guitarists would be like writing their own music, and of course like it would be programmed and stuff because they don't have a band. And but that, I feel like that was more like that era. All the rock inspired musicians like would go over to YouTube, film their videos, do their shredding, and make their backing tracks. They just made
very. I don't mean to knock it in any way, because some of it's good, but a lot of it felt very dry, feelless, uninspired, just like shredding. Do you know who calls it? I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube channel Spectre Sound Studios. Glenn.
I don't think I have.
You probably would know him. He's the guy who always curses a lot and yells a lot. He lives in Canada. He's like a metal guy. If you don't, you should watch him. I feel like you would love his YouTube channel. But he calls music like that, and I think this is the best way to put it, musical masturbation. But it provides no pleasure to anybody except the person making it. And I feel like that's very accurate, though. You understand what I'm saying, like with that.
Yeah,
And
I know. I know.
that's why rock left. It's like why it lost such a dominant place on radio. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, record labels lost money, so they stopped signing bands because it was way more expensive. There's that too. But because there was that era where record labels still dominated the music industry, like the 2010s, where record labels still controlled the industry, but they had no money. It was like a very weird, it was that transition phase.
Yeah.
So, like, there were no bands. And anybody making rock were these indie shredders on 8-string guitars making this scream noise music that, like, only, like, people that were into that very niche genre would listen to. So it became rock. That's what rock as a whole became as a genre. So people stopped listening to it and just started listening to old shit. What happened in COVID is the TikTok era blew up, proved that you don't need a record label for anything. So people just started all becoming independent artists, whether you're a band or a solo act or whatever. Like, record labels really have lost their relevancy since COVID because of TikTok and things like that. And I think, to that credit, a lot of bands are coming back and a lot of new bands are coming up because now it's anybody's game. And there's no one fixed rule. The record label for years kept reinventing what it was, but there was always, whether it was, first you had to get on radio, or then you had to have music videos on MTV, or then you had to do TRL, or whatever it is, right? Like, there used to be one fixed way rules, even though it was evolving. At any given point, there was one way to make it. Now there's like a billion. So I see bands coming back because there's this culture of people on TikTok or on social media who hate it and have, like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if you have, like, something like you thinking about that. You get what I'm getting at, though.
Yeah. I totally get what you're saying. It's honestly a crazy, like, we've been told this by our we've been told this by our mentors. Like, right now the music industry is pretty much the Wild West. Like, there's no music, or labels don't know what to do. A lot of artists don't know what to do because it's so much. There's so much that can happen or can't happen, or like there's, like, you could make it, like Nick was saying, in a billion different ways. No one really knows what to do. But it is crazy to see, like, rock bands. I feel like also something that was contributing with like this big boom of, like, new bands and new artists is being inspired, because some of the legacy acts like Metallica are staying relevant and finding ways to access that younger audience. Like, they were in Stranger Things, and even now they are in Fortnite. Like, they have a whole dedicated season, like 2-3 months, where Metallica is in Fortnite. And, like, it's really funny. I've never seen the metal community so united in playing a video game. Like, I've been, like, with some of the bands that I've met, I've been playing Fortnite with them.
That's great.
Yeah, it's been such a good time.
You're 100% right, and you actually touched on something I was just... Can I just stop for a second? And Jonah, you agree with me on this. I already know this, but I'm going to tell the audience this. The reason this show works and is so perfect is because you and I can be, like, exactly the same person a lot. We think so similarly. Like, you knew... that's exactly where I was going with it, and you just, like, took it and ran. Like, there was a connect... It's like we have, like, we communicate telepathically or something. Like... There's just this intuitive thing between us. It's called chemistry, ladies and gentlemen. That's why shows work. But the truth is of the matter, like you said, is, and I'm going to talk about this, and I have bashed social media. I have bashed TikTok many times on this show, and how the culture has divided people apart, and I still believe that. But I want to speak to a credit and a positive thing of the era. COVID really did bring back rock, and you can quote me on that, because, like I said about what happened and how it shook up the industry and nobody knows what they're doing anymore. Besides, there is legacy acts were already relevant, so they kind of put themselves onto social media as other people were.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this once on the show, if you remember, is how our generation, Gen Z, is the first generation that's nostalgic about a time they never lived in.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had the conversation about this on the show.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And I think that's part of the reason rock has come back. Because if you look at TikTok especially, and you look at all the people who are curating rock content, I mean, yeah, there's Rick Beato on YouTube. And I think Rick Beato has been a huge, because even though he's a boomer, he is so relatable to people our age.
Yeah, and he's making this catalog of great... He's making this catalog of interviews of great musicians that I feel like no interviewer has ever touched on it, and it's the stuff that's inspiring for musicians. Like, they're interviews specifically for musicians to watch, and that just makes it so inspiring and helps them. Like, it honestly helps them with like the songwriting and like even like getting into the music industry and gigs. They're the greatest things.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's contributed to it, but with social media, what I was kind of getting at is that element of, it's in your room and it's raw has kind of brought it back, because people, like when we had Mel on the show, Melissa Mulligan, shout out, Music Career Mastermind, how she was kind of talking about how prove it culture is kind of starting to form. Like, people want to see if you can actually sing, if you can actually play, and that's because of social media, because people want to see this raw form content. Things are kind of circling back because everyone's so nostalgic about everything's just nostalgia. That's the era we live in is looking backward, which is strange. The modern time is looking back. And because of that, it's kind of factioning into two people who want to keep going towards this dark, in my opinion, dark path of AI and everything being fake and generated, and you don't know what's real ever, and everything's a virtual reality, and I'm not into that at all. And then it's going to faction into our side. I think you're on my side with this, right? I mean, duh. But like, of people actually playing, people actually singing, people actually recording, and like just the way that things used to be done. And because people are so nostalgic about a time they never lived in, a lot of the people making content around rock music online are like young people, are like, it's not Gen X, it's not millennials, it's not, besides Rick Beato, it's not boomers, it's really Gen Z.
Yeah.
And
no, I've definitely seen that.
And part of that is because millennials are kind of, and I blame millennials for a lot of things, as my dad calls them, Generation Y. It's so accurate. Come on, that's just fact, though.
Yeah.
They're Generation Y. But listen, for the most part, there's some cool millennials out there, but the culture of millennials, let's put it that way, has become this, really was like an anti-rock generation in a way, because they kind of curated this culture of kind of where pop music kind of went to, and a lot of hip hop too, just a very manufactured stuff. And I feel like Gen Z was going down that path until COVID. And when TikTok and things like really expanded the world, I think it's kind of opened people's viewpoints. Now, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's kind of like a long-winded, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a long-winded way to explain it. But Jonah, I don't know if you have like a better way to explain it, but you get what I'm saying, right? It's like our generation almost doesn't want to do what the millennials did, which always happens. You never want to do what the generation before you did. And
yeah, no, I totally get that.
Which is why I think the most popular genre in our most popular rock genre is metal and glam rock and 80s stuff and like classic rock, because millennials like they all like that, like grunge and like punk, and you know what I mean, like that was like kind of their thing. So I feel like our generation going forward is kind of looking back to before that and going, hey, this like it's always that rebellious thing. There's always a rebellious nature to scenes and the way music evolves and happens. But there's just a lot of things that had to happen. TikTok, COVID. Just AI coming out and people being like, this is weird, I don't like any part. Like, there's a lot of moments that have happened, I think, perfectly at the right time, that have gradually evolved and built a young fan base within rock. I know I've been just talking nonstop for the last like 5 minutes. But Jonah, maybe if
No, it's
you have a
good
better way
stuff.
of explaining it, or if you have something to add to that, I'd love to hear. But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying. Yeah, it's just so trippy. Like I'm thinking about like a year ago when both of us kind of had like no idea. It was like a weird phase in rock where like things were starting to move, but like we didn't know like where it was gonna go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like a year ago when we started the podcast, right? I think, when was our first
It was
episode?
a little over that. It was.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God, we're gonna look up on YouTube right now, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have editing, so you're
I'm
just gonna have to
surprised
sit
we
here
never
and-
did an episode for our 1 year anniversary. This is our 1 year anniversary episode. That we're just gonna call it that, even though it's not even.
It actually
probably
wasn't.
not
It
even-
was under a year ago. Actually, our first episode was 11 months ago.
Oh,
It was July.
so we're coming up
17th.
soon.
We're coming up soon. Happy 1 year, baby.
Oh.
I was talking to the show, Jonah, not you. Get over yourself. Listen. This is part of the reporting.
I just wasn't expecting that.
I wasn't either. I just thought it and I said it. Well, listen. That's kind of crazy. Like you said, it's been a year, and where we are, not just personally, but where society is, where rock culture is, where pop culture is, where just the world is so different, drastically different than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
Life has never changed this much year to year than since COVID, I think, in my opinion.
It's
usually
feel
a couple
that.
decades.
I feel like
it's usually like it's usually decade by decade that things evolve, and that's very evident in the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. But when people look at the 2020s to like moving forward, it's more like each year is like a different decade.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on, but like
it's because honestly, we're still. I feel like society is still recovering from the pandemic, and those couple years in pandemic, it was like, so we had what was going on before the pandemic and how society ran, and then we had these couple of years, and then that like put a stop to everything and had everyone take a look at what was going on in their own lives, in their situations, in society as a whole, and how the world works. And like, cause like the world, I feel like the world is always like go, and you never get a chance to stop and think about it.
It never stops turning, right?
Yeah, and it never stops turning. But like when COVID happened, the world stopped turning, and for the first time, every single person in the world got to stop and take a look at what was going on at the same time.
Yep.
That never happens. Like normally
not
it's
only
like
did they look,
like a couple people. Like
exactly.
You were saying?
Like they looked at, and I think that's where this comes from, is people didn't just look at where they were at. They started looking backward to figure out where we've been because they had so much time on their hands. And now that's why our world every year keeps changing all the time, because we're in a constant identity crisis. The 2020s don't really have an identity. Like each decade has an identity. 80s were big and flashy. The 90s were super like cut and raw and just raw and dirty. And like the 2000s were like super punkish. And like, the 70s kind of had that like hippie vibe. And like the 60s were like, love each other. And the 50s were like, you know what I'm saying? Like each decade has such
each decade has a very unique
identity. And the 2020s do not. And I don't think it will. And I don't know moving forward if it will, because the way the world, there's just a constant identity crisis. And because of social media and the way you're able to split up so many niches, there's not really a pop culture anymore. Everyone lives in their own factions. Everything's so fractured, and everybody lives in their own identity. And this is another conversation, another callback on the show, how we kind of talked about how every genre has so many subgenres, and the most famous person to you, your neighbor, could have no idea who they are.
Yeah,
you know what's more evident in that? I want to talk about this is, I'm not going to touch on this or talk about, but what just happened with Taylor Swift and Dave Grohl, right? That whole thing. Which, by the way, I want to say I blame the media for, because I think they're causing shit for a joke being told. But that's neither here nor there. And I don't blame Taylor, because I think somebody went to her and told her what he said out of context, and they're trying to create shit. Anyways, that being said, I think it's so evident is so many of Taylor Swift's fans had no idea who Dave Grohl was when they watched the clip.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And that's crazy to me.
Like,
but that's the world that we live in now. 30 years ago, if somebody was a huge star, everybody knew who they were.
Yeah.
You knew at least one of their songs. You've seen one of their movies, one of their shows. Like, you know what I mean? The world is so different now, because it's so split up by people's interests and genres and niche and algorithms. And we've talked about this many times on the show. But I think that's what's contributing to the lack of identity to the decade. Because no one can agree on anything anymore. It's politics, music, movies, culture. No one can agree on anything anymore. And that's why we live in such a confused time where every single person seems to have their own identity. And it's all a callback to something that already happened. It's crazy.
Yeah, dude, we live in a trippy time.
We definitely do. Not as trippy as the 60s, but, you know, in a different way. I can't think of I don't know. I think if we go any further, we're just going to start breaking people's heads from the mind explosion. So we're probably going to have to
we got to save a little bit, so then you guys come back.
Save a little bit. We'll have to I feel like we need to do a part 2 to this in a couple weeks once it's just us again.
Yeah.
Kind of pick up this discussion.
We should pick it back up at our 1-year anniversary.
You remember? Can you get me flowers? Well, we'll see if that remains to be true. But until then, this has been pretty cool. This went really quickly.
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Well, I'll let you guys think about that. Until then, I'm Nick Valley.
I'm Jonah Dockenai. And this
is
Rev Rock
Revolution.